All right, so we are in the PC Bong right now. Do you find yourself in here often? Do you play games in here?
Yeah, especially when I was a new writer. I was in here pretty much every night, getting drunk and playing drunk ARAMs with
Well,
my
hopefully
friends.
not too many drunk ARAMs in here, because I'm sitting down with Andrea Sepenzis. Did I do it right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I did it right.
You got
Okay,
it.
last name is interesting. What do you do at Riot?
I'm a researcher here at Riot. I tend to do a lot of market research, so that means researching giant populations of players, sometimes entire countries of gamers. I tend to do a lot of research around what people think of League of Legends, especially people who don't play League of Legends, lapsed players or new players or people who want to come play the game. And I also do a lot of what I'd call cross-cultural research, which is trying to understand how the gamers in the different markets that we make games are different and how we can serve their needs differently.
So this is not like you're less of a researcher who's like looking at the way people are playing in-game. Like you're not looking at Lee Sin win rates or something.
No, and please don't ask me about that.
Okay. So what is an example? Like, can you give me a more concrete example of something that you've worked on that maybe fans would understand?
Yeah, well, I can give you an example, and then I can also talk about some things I've actually done here. But say Riot was going to make a dating simulator, Dream Daddy 2, Yes,
Okay.
No Daddy, there's something like that.
I'm very excited about
this.
this.
I might go and say, hey, what is the market size for dating simulators?
Yeah.
How many players are there that exist in the regions that we might release a game in that want to play this thing? What we would have to tell them about that game to get them to actually be interested in, and what would the game have to be to actually be a thing they would want to play?
Yeah.
So those tend to be the types of questions I answer. For a long time, I answered those types of questions for League. I was trying to figure out, in regions where our growth is kind of plateauing, right? We're not really getting giant amounts of new people trying League every day anymore. I mean, enough, like we're still in like a really giant healthy state, but it's not the way it was 4 years ago.
Sure.
It's like, hey, what is holding them back? What would they need to hear about League to want to come play it? So a lot of our marketing stuff that we're doing this year, stuff that I've worked on, the new player experience changes that we're making with the new tutorial are also the kinds of things that I've worked on for those folks.
Yeah, I saw there was I think one of the things that people have seen recently is like the ads that came out where it's like players trying different weapons and stuff like that for trying to figure out what their role is. So kind of cool to see that stuff.
Yeah, and that came directly from players, right? Before we sit down to make an advertisement, like we don't just go, what do we think is the most compelling thing about League of Legends, right? Like it doesn't necessarily matter what we think, though it matters a little bit. We actually go out and we talk to teenage gamers. For that project in particular, we talked to teenage gamers all over the world actually, and we found out what they thought about League, what they knew about it before we had exposed anything to them about it, and we kind of like pitched some different things at them. We're like, hey, so this game has all of these things. What of these things appeal to you? And ultimately after going through a giant creative process, it gets translated, that finding, that insight gets translated into an advertisement like that.
So is the idea that people like the different roles that you can switch, you can be an archer, it's sort of the concept of being all these different things?
Yeah, and obviously there are many other compelling things about League that have, as messages, have captured for us a lot of our players. The competitive scene, esports, all of that kind of stuff are things that have pulled in a lot of the people we have now. But I think when we look at the product, we see, the people who are going to be gotten by that message for League, like they know that we are that. We've been around for a really long time. We're pretty giant gamers who come in for that thing. They're going to find us eventually. There are also a lot of other things League offers, and we kind of wanted to do a messaging campaign that sort of pushed forward some of those other alternate things that League is fun for.
So is this a role that you've had, a lot of people don't know that this type of role exists in the video game industry. Is this something you've done at a lot of different video game companies, or what's your background?
Yeah, I never did this at a video game company. I actually had no idea video game companies did this either. I mean, I've always been a super hardcore gamer, but growing up, I never thought I'd work in the industry because I was like, I'm not a developer. I'm never going to be a programmer. I'm not an artist. What the hell could I possibly do to make a video game great? And then I went, separately, became really fascinated by how humans perceive things and using scientific measurements to understand how humans think. I did marketing research for a lot of Fortune 100 companies who obviously spend giant amounts of money investing in how to understand selling, like how to sell paper towels to people or whatever. I learned that craft, and then finally, synergistically and perfectly, it was like I could finally apply that craft to a product that I actually really cared about, So it was kind of a jumble how it ended up happening. I've never done this for another video game company, and many video game companies actually don't have someone like me because you have to be at a certain scale at a company for it to be worth investing in the kind of research that I do, right? Like if you're just a tiny indie studio or developer, you don't need to know exactly how many millions of core gamers there are in China, right? That's like not valuable for you. Riot kind of conveniently now is at the scale and starting to kind of grow into a company that eventually will have multiple products and those kinds of things. So it was really nice, I kind of came across Riot right when my skill set became relevant to Riot as a company.
So what is your background? So you worked at Fortune 500 companies, but what led you down this path to doing research stuff?
Yeah. Long, weird story. I definitely did not grow up thinking I would be a business person. I was like a punk. I was a DJ. Like I liked writing. I liked music. Like I had no dreams ever of entering like a corporate life. But as I got into high school and college, I realized that the thing I was most fascinated by is like basically sociology. You know, as I started to read and learn more about how people have analyzed human behavior in the aggregate, both historically and now, and once I kind of was exposed to that kind of stuff, I knew that that was actually the thing that I wanted to do with my life. I was very passionate about politics at the time, so I decided to sort of apply that craft skill set to the political world. I went into politics, realized that it's super dirty and that nobody there is doing research to find out what's happening. Everyone there is doing research to try to like push forward their own agenda or position. So I had the skill set, but I didn't really know what to do with it. So I just kind of kept bouncing around, developing the skill set, hoping eventually I'd find a company or a product that I actually wanted to apply those skills to. So yeah, but I was a mercenary. Like, you know, I worked at a market research firm. Any Fortune 100 company could hire us and ask us to figure out why people aren't drinking soda anymore, or like any variety of other questions, you know, how we should price diesel in Croatia, or like questions like that. You know, those topics, they might not seem super interesting, but when you are asked to ask questions like that across a broad diversity of industries, you start to learn things about the world, you know, and you start to learn how like different industries pattern after each other, and you can see these giant like, I don't know how to describe them, but they're sort of almost, you're learning things about how humanity moves in the aggregate by seeing how different people behave in different product categories, you know,
Yeah.
so that was cool. But now I like feel happy that I can just hyper-focus on one. Like really for the past 2.5 years, Riot has empowered me to focus 1,000,000,000% of my time on understanding how gamers move and why games are successful and those kinds of things, which is like inherently fascinating to me, you know?
Yeah, I assume there is not too much like it's interesting. I know from the esports side that like brands and companies, a lot of people sort of write off games because it's a relatively new thing, and so like
That's crazy. We're a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. Like
yeah.
we're here now, you know.
Like a
Yeah.
chief marketing officer at some company is very familiar with the idea of like advertising on television or in traditional sports, but they don't understand that they're like how big games are. So it's kind of cool to see you like, I imagine you're doing a lot of work that is somewhat new, that people haven't done before.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like, you know, if I was doing research on makeup or something like that, there'd be an 80-year history of doing research on makeup advertising, makeup packaging, makeup distribution, how people use it, all that kind of stuff. You know, but for games, it's like, we are like the big baby, right? Like we just massively suddenly became a giant entertainment industry. A ton of this stuff has never been done before. Like a ton of the kind of questions that like, you know, we get to answer every day, nobody knows. Nobody has ever researched that thing before. You know, so it's kind of like we're sort of at the forefront of understanding gamers in a lot of ways just because we're asking the kind of questions no one's asked. Like,
so how did you make the jump from politics, which you found you were a little jaded
morally
about?
repugnant, I guess.
Yes. Just going with a softer word there, but how did you go from that to doing research on how to price diesel in Croatia to Riot Games? Like, was it just you were looking for a job and you landed here, or what happened?
It actually is a kind of funny story. So one of my friends at the market research firm I was working at, Kimberly, was looking for a new job. She'd become unhappy, and she was working with a recruiter. And she walked into her office one day and she was like, man, this recruiter threw this crazy job at me. But honestly, when she described it to me, I thought of you. She said, the job is that you have to argue with highly, highly opinionated nerds for like the voice of the player. Like, you know, and that was basically how she articulated, that was how the recruiter had articulated the job to her. And I was like, I just listened to her and I was like, oh my God, I was born for this. Like, seriously, you know, because I think it can be hard, like sometimes when you're talking about insights, right? You can talk about data, but when you're talking to someone who has a deeply developed intuitive opinion or understanding, someone like a Greg, right? Someone who, they have their own knowledge, right? And they might look at data, but like their intuition often is going to be just as strong or just as powerful as any data.
You're talking
you
about
can
Ghost
bring.
Crawler.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be credible. Like, you know, you have to be, when you're trying to convince them, hey, this data means you should do X or Y thing, it's very hard to do that if you're not a gamer, right? Like, especially at Riot, where being a gamer and like caring about our players is kind of the credibility floor through which we can all work with each other. So I kind of knew that like if I came here, you know, I thought I could actually be successful at that job, right? Because I am incredibly passionate about games. I've been a hardcore PC gamer my entire life, but I also, you know, can be relatively objective about my own opinion and like go assess data and kind of be like, hey, maybe I think this would be cool, but like it really, really looks like from all of this stuff that actually what we should do for the players, you know, is this. So navigating that line basically is the art and the craft of our job. It's part of it is being able to get the data, but a large part of it also is being able to know when you should privilege intuition, know when you should privilege what your designers know or what your leaders know versus like what the data is telling you, you know.
One of the, you mentioned that you've been a hardcore gamer for a long time. I've met a lot of people who work on the design side or on the art side, and for them, like, they were a gamer, and then they went to college, and they were just trying to figure out how to get to turn that into like a gaming job. Then they went straight in. What was it like for you? You're a hardcore gamer, but you're doing, political science stuff. You're doing stuff for market research. Like, what was that like? I guess you were doing all this in your off hours?
Yeah, no, I stayed away forever, and it was weird because yes, I am like a late entrant. I started working in the industry when I was 28. A lot of the folks that I know here, they started working in the industry right off. Like you're saying, that was like always their dream and they went in. In a lot of ways, coming to Riot and finally, I was always like a closet gamer, not that I was ashamed of it or anything like that, but I was operating in circles and spheres in which most of the people around me weren't gamers. Like it was my private passion, it was kind of like my secret thing that I did just for me. Coming to Riot was really cool because I felt like coming home, like I finally felt like I was with my people. One of the most special things about being here is that we truly are very culturally united. Like we just have this thing in common. Like we all love the same thing the most. That just makes making friends here and the kind of like, it's just so socially wonderful to be here because everybody has that thing in common. I'd never experienced anything like that before coming to work here.
Before you came to Riot, like what were some of the big games that you played and enjoyed?
Yeah, so I'm kind of weird. I'm definitely not your typical like LOL player in terms of my play style. I pretty much exclusively play 3 kinds of games. Like deep story-driven narrative, like, kind of like single-player action-adventure RPGs. So the first game I ever fell in love with was Baldur's Gate, and basically everything that's like that's ever come out since then, I've been like a hardcore fangirl of. So obviously of today's era, it's like Mass Effect and like Dragon Age and things like that I love. And then I also really love 4X games. So I just have consistently played, whatever 4X game iteration of my franchises are out at the time. So like, right now I'm playing a lot of like Civ 6 and Stellaris and stuff like that. And then I also play MMOs. It was kind of sad for me to see MMOs kind of be a thing and then stop being a thing. I am like desperately hoping that it comes back someday. That's like my #1 dream.
So you're playing like WoW or what?
Yeah, I play a lot of WoW. I played WoW in beta. I played it pretty much all of my senior year of high school and some of my freshman year of college. And then I was like a freshman in college and I was like, hey, maybe you should be a freshman in college instead of spending all of your time in WoW. So I kind of churned at that point. But yeah, pretty much every major MMO that's come out and tried to replace WoW, I've like gotten into for a little bit while and then watched it die and cried and been like, no, one of you please take like.
Yeah. What is interesting, because I also talked to Ghostcrawler, it's an interesting story. He had a PhD in marine biology. He was doing all this like research stuff, like very much in like the marine biology scientist world. Mm-hmm. Then he ends up in games. Similarly, like I think a lot of people feel like they like games, but it might be too late in their career for them to switch into this industry, right? Yeah. Like that this is something you do fresh out of college. If you are 5 or 6 or 7 years into a career that feels completely different from games, like how can you ever make that jump?
Yeah.
But you found a way to do that.
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, I will say Insights is an incredibly scalable skill set, right? Like pretty much every company of any size or scale needs people who can do the kinds of things that I can do at a certain point. So that might be uniquely lucky in that way. But I would say also that like, games are business. Right now, games are big business. So like if you have a job, if you have a skill set, chances are pretty good that there's some way that a gaming company might want to use that thing. When you think about it, the industry is constantly changing. Like, esports like journalists or, like shoutcasters, that job category didn't really exist 10 years ago, but it definitely exists now. So I do think that if you want to work in games and you're like coming into it late, like just do it. I've never been happier than like finally being able to be here, and I'm super glad I did that,
Yeah. What does a moment of success look like for you? Like when have you felt, maybe while you're at Riot or just sort of conceptually broadly, like whenever you felt like you've done something where you feel like you've achieved something or it's been a successful moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, really successful moments for me, I will say the happiest time ever, right, for me was I was working one of our titles in development, and it was in a genre that I didn't know very well, like, one that I didn't personally play. And I was feeling really insecure about it because I was like, here I am coming into a game in development with people who have devoted their entire lives to understanding this problem space. And it's like, yes, I've always known about that kind of game, right? But like, I don't understand it deeply the way a player or an enthusiast does. And even if you have this skill set and you know that you don't have to be a person to understand them, that's the whole craft of social science, is not needing that, I was like really dubious about my own ability to like deeply understand the space as my people did. And so I was very lucky Riot allowed me to go travel around the world for about 2 months, like just like deeply speaking to players around and in this genre, like just trying to understand them as deeply as I possibly could in all of these different regions. And I came back and I kind of like delivered my findings to the team, and they were like, they said that it caused them to think about the space in a way that they had never thought about it before, and ask like really deep questions about things that they kind of hadn't been thinking about when they were thinking about the game. And that's what feels like success to me. Is it's never getting someone to do something. It's more like empowering our incredibly smart people to be even smarter about the audience. Like when they're telling me that I helped them understand something in a new way, that is absolutely the most successful moment for me, because we have great people. Like their default intuition is good. In order to add alpha with more information, like you have to be pretty good at figuring out what that alpha could even be, and then like going and getting it, you know? I mean, most of our defaults are like generally pretty good, so to get above that, you need to deliver something excellent. So anyway, that felt very good to me when that worked out.
Okay, so conversely, have you, I assume that a lot of your research might discover inefficiencies in this company, right?
Does,
like
yeah.
moments where maybe Riot is doing something wrong and everything looks like it's successful, and you have to kind of convince people like, no, this way that we've been doing something for all these years is very wrong.
Yeah, that definitely does happen sometimes. I will say, often those will be my greatest successes as well, right? You know, because it's like, I believe in this place. I want us to be successful. When we can point out a thing that we should have been doing, or a thing we didn't know, or a thing we were wrong about, like that makes us stronger, that makes us better. So in a lot of ways, you know, even though those might be uncomfortable conversations sometimes, they can be some of the most empowering moments for other writers too, because they're like, God, all along I assumed this was fine, but now I actually know, so I know that I can go fix it. Yeah. You know, sometimes showing people like what the problem is empowers them and inspires them to actually go do something about it. You know, so those are hard, but I would say my least happy moments here are the times when we like just fail to get our shit together and do something. You know, because usually Rioters are all very culturally aligned with each other on what we are trying to do. We are trying to make awesome things for gamers. There's like never a room full of Rioters in which everybody is not hyper-focused on that goal. You know, despite that though, we're still a corporation, we're still humans. Like, you know, and there are some times when all of the conditions are in place, we have the right talent, we have the right people, we have the right motivation, and like we still can't get stuff done. That's what hurts me, because I guess in a lot of ways, I and probably many other Rioters idealize Riot. And like, you know, when we sort of see that happen, we're like, oh wait, we're a business? We're like subject to all the same political bullshit that all other businesses are? Like, you know, that I can't accept that, you know? So those tend to be my least happy moments, but those exist at every job. Like, you know, this is still a company, it's not heaven. Like, you know, so it's like, yeah.
What is really interesting is you are taking kind of like these human moments, these human desires, like the things that humans are passionate about, and you're turning them into data. And I'm very curious if there's been a moment where you have seen the reverse, where you've used the data that you've gathered and you've seen sort of the results hit back on like the human side, right? Where maybe you see, I don't know what that would be, but I'm kind of curious, like have you had sort of that reflection back? Yeah.
No, that's a really great question. And honestly, like when you're a mercenary market researcher, like, right, you're hired by various companies to do various things, you never get that feedback loop. Your report on diesel pricing for blank and blank goes into some drawer somewhere. You imagine that's what they price diesel as in Croatia, but you have no idea. And like you never know if you were right or not, if you get that feedback. Here at Riot, you actually do get to do that, you know? So there have definitely been some times with League, you know, so for example, this marketing campaign we just talked about, where it's like, you know, once that thing went live, like I actually went to the YouTube comments and I was like watching the players being exposed to like an introduction of League of Legends in that way for the first time, like actually respond to the things that we had discovered would make them respond and make them interested. And I was like, oh my God, like actually that was a compelling message. Sweet, it worked, you know? Yeah. So that is something that you only really get to do if you're like a business strategist at a company, as opposed to being at one at like a firm, you know, and it's one of the best things about being an internal person like that.
Is there anything you would say for the people who are interested in getting a job in the gaming world, and sort of with, especially like looking at sort of the areas that you're in, which is more marketing business? I don't even know how to directly categorize what you do. Right at the intersection of those two things. Yeah, it's kind of there. For people that are thinking like, I want to work at a game company, but again, I can't do like art or design or whatever, sort of the thought process you had.
Yeah, my thought process was basically like, okay, well, what could I do? I can understand how humans think and what they think, and like how to measure that in a way that isn't just gross noise. You know, like that is a skill that you can develop. I would say that if you want to do this particular thing, if you want to like study human behavior, whatever tools or skill sets, right? Whether that's data science or, you know, like behavioral analysis or the kinds of things I do, like primary research, you know, one of the only things that American undergraduate education is actually well suited to teaching you how to do as a job is that thing. You know, so if you study psych, if you study stats, like, you know, you can build yourself into the kind of person who's able to do these things independently. The one thing I would just recommend as much as possible is like, learn your craft holistically. You know, it is very, I would say the people who are best in this field are rarely the people who come into it from a technical skill. They're rarely the people who are like, I'm gonna be super good at math, and then I'm gonna be super good at math and use math for social science, right? It's usually people who come into it like having a sort of deep need to try to understand humanities and humans, and then they're like, all right, what tools do I need? Like, I often find that those people are the ones who are best, because ultimately, like, you know, any one methodology is incredibly limited at teaching you what's going on in the world. Like, in order to actually get close to truth, which we never do, but we try and try and try constantly to get closer to truth, the more methods you can mix, the more powerful you're going to be.
Finally, anything you would say to anybody who is, you know, sort of on the outside? They might have their ideas about what it's like working at Riot, or what Riot Games is like as a company, but you know, they can only sort of see what it's like from beyond the fence, right? Mm-hmm. For you, anything that you would sort of say to those that are interested in Riot as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that Riot is incredibly unique because we all have a couple of things in common, right? We all are incredibly growth-minded, which is like a corporate buzzword, but basically what it means is that like people here never like just settle into a job. Like people here are always looking to constantly grow and improve themselves, and that's a certain type of personality trait, right? We tend to be people who are challenging, opinionated, ambitious, like, you know, have strong personalities, or giant collection of pretty strong personalities, you know, and that's a particular kind of working environment. But I would also say the second thing we have in common is the thing that allows those strong personalities to interact in a really like healthfully collaborative way, which is that like we literally wake up every day being like, I am in service of the player. Like, you know, and having that kind of like union, you know, I think it is just an incredibly special culture that is like very unlikely to be found anywhere else. So yeah, that is what it's like here. You know, it can be stressful, it can be challenging, we can disagree with each other. We all have very strong opinions and care very, very much. You know, so it's like not a place you can kind of show up passively, right? You have to show up here. But when you do, like, because we are all united by our mission, like we can actually accomplish really great things and like feel super good about what we do. So, you know, that is kind of how it feels to be here, I guess.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.